All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Writing Quest. My name is Brendan Pugh, and in today's interview, we are talking with Bryan Wilson. He's a self-published author, and we're just going to talk to him about his writing process and how things are going with his book. And how you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on here, Brendan, and I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, for sure. So why don't we just start with tell us about yourself, how you got started with writing, where your idea came from, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm Brian. I'm 38 years old. I live in the New England area of the states, and I've just been a kind of avid reader of sci-fi and fantasy from a young age. I want to say I was about 12 when I read The Hobbit. That just launched me into the fantasy genre. I went to Lord of the Rings from there, and all through my teens, I was reading somewhere. I want to say 15 or 16. I read Ender's Game, and that just launched me into sci-fi from there. And eventually, that love for reading molded kind of into a desire to want to write. And I've been kind of toying with it, and it's been a hobby, really, of traveled with me through my life. But actually, my debut book, The Forsaken Planet, actually started outlining and writing that when I want to say like 18 years old, and that just kind of traveled with me through life. I run my own business. It traveled with me through that whole process, through college, through getting married, through having kids. It's been a little bit of a wild ride, but in June 2023, I finally published it, and yeah, it's been so far so good. It's gotten good reception, and actually, just a few weeks ago, I published the second installment of the series, and people seem to be really enjoying it.
Nice. Yeah, it seems like The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings are like everyone's entry point because that's the
For
same for
sure.
me. It's I remember well I'd been a big Star Wars fan, and then when I was 10 or whatever, the Lord of the Rings movies came out, and so my dad took us to those, and then he got us the
Mhm.
books, and you know spiraled from there.
Yeah, yeah. No, almost everyone. It seems to be the case. And I
Yeah.
remember actually I read it. I want to say I read the Lord of the Rings probably a couple years, 3 years maybe before it came out as movies. And I just
Hmm.
remember all my buddies were so excited, and I was kind of the jerk that was like, "I read it. You guys haven't read it. It's gonna be so good. You're gonna love it." And sure enough, it was obviously really well done. So
Yeah. Yeah, I'm 34, so I was about 10 when the first one came out, maybe 12. And so
okay.
I hadn't read the first one, and so we went to the Fellowship, and then I immediately read Two Towers and Return of the King. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So do you find you gravitate more towards the sci-fi? I mean, obviously you wrote it seems like more of a sci-fi book, but do you gravitate more sci-fi or kind of a little bit of both?
So my book is actually very much, I would call it a sci-fantasy book. It's
Hmm.
I'm sure we'll go into it a little bit later, but it's got a very equal, what I like to think of as an equal element of both genres. And I probably gravitate a little bit more myself for my reading preferences to fantasy. Um, my favorite, obviously, Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit were huge ones for me when I was younger, and I would say my favorite book series ever is Wheel of Time. I love the grand scope of massive world building and stuff like that. It's just, I mean, maybe he went a little too far with it in aspects, but just that story just really pulled to me, and so I think that kind of has had me leaning a little more towards the fantasy end of things. But I'm also all over the place. I really love urban fantasy too. I kind of like stories that connect to our world. Obviously, Harry Potter was a big one to me for that reason, probably. But I also love the sci-fi. Now probably definitely in my top three of favorite series would be Red Rising, and it's that's I just love those books. So it's really a mix of all of them. But if I had to lean one way or the other, it's probably a little bit fantasy.
Yeah, I have Red Risings on my list. I've been told by a lot of people that that one's a good one. I'm actually in the middle of the Wheel of Time. I'm reading
You're in
I'm
the
in the
tough
fifth
part.
one. So, well, I guess maybe still in the first third. I'm in the
Yeah,
fifth.
yeah.
So, I really love it so far, and I would he really took world building to a whole new level.
For
I
sure.
struggle. I will say I struggle with the prose. So like I love the story, I love the characters, I love the all of it about it, but I struggle with reading the prose. For some reason I just don't quite connect with that part of it, but you know.
Yeah, it could be. So when I read it, I probably want to say I read them in my early 20s or maybe even a little younger. I first started reading the series, and I had a lot more time on my hands back then, so I think I was okay with it all. But I could see nowadays how, being adults and having jobs and all that stuff, that flowery prose can kind of just drag out a little bit and
Yeah, not
probably
to
pull you out
mention
of the story.
reading time is pretty limited.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So where did maybe where did the beginning, the origins of this story start for you? Like you mentioned you kind of had an idea for it when you were 18, but where like what is the you looked at a thing and you're like, here's an idea. Where did that kind of happen?
I I think it's a mix of a few things. I I worked at a full service gas station when I was younger, and so the night I would closing shift, and the nights would be absolutely dead. And I remember it was I don't know if it was right after I read Ender's Game, but at least a couple of years after, sometime in that time frame. I just loved that whole kind of simulation idea and stuff like that, and that really what launched me into a story of I wanted to do something sort of like that. But I mixed a lot of things I enjoyed at the time into it. I really enjoyed the Halo games. I threw those, kind of the elements of those into it. I loved I don't even know. I loved the movie Independence Day. That was me, and that's like still a core movie to me and my group of buddies. So it's there's elements of that went into it, and then I must have already started Wheel of Time because I definitely also love kind of just that naive, Wheel of Time, Randolph Thor's that naive farm boy, innocent in all regards, and just gets everything thrown on him. I love the idea of something like that, but meshing it with our world, kind of a naive, innocent. My story as a college age kid from Earth, from our time, and bringing just this universe balancing scales thrown onto their shoulders. And another influence would have been Harry Potter because again, that one's kind of intermixed with our world. That was always my appeal to that series. I found it to be phenomenal writing, of course, but it was also just the appeal of who's to say this isn't who am I to say this isn't happening? I'm a kid that dreams big, so it's I think it's cool to think about something like this actually occurring out there in the world. So I kind of took all that stuff and just meshed it into my own little story here.
Yeah, there's something interesting about the idea, like, of the world behind the world, like the things
Yeah,
that we don't see or perceive. I think I don't know why that seems to captivate people because I agree with you. You're always like, well, what would happen if there was a doorway in that stone wall?
yeah,
Like
yep,
it's just an interesting concept. I think that's one of the things about Harry Potter that makes it so magical is it's like it's this whole other, you walk through a hidden doorway and you're literally in a whole new world, you know?
yeah, for sure. And I meshed mine with the idea of space, and we
Mhm,
know so little about that out there. So it's just I felt like the possibilities were endless for me to kind of create this whole story. I've also been super interested my whole life in kind of the ancient past of Earth. The again mysteries there. We know so little about what came kind of more than
mhm.
like 12,000 years ago. So it was just really cool. Kind of meshed the lore of my story with that and with Earth, and so it was able to allow me to have a bunch of fun with it as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that I mean, it's really hard to do anything that's like 100% original these days. That's where like the idea for the stories that I'm working on, they all came from a little bit of like Star Wars, Harry Potter, Avatar: The Last Airbender, like you all these different kind of things, and then over time it just becomes and especially, those things that you experienced when you were a kid, that they naturally end up in your stuff. It's hard to not do that,
No,
and
of
so I think it's
course,
great.
yeah. I mean, I hear all the time. I forget what it is. It's either Dune has been so popular lately, and I've been seeing a lot of things on like social media and stuff. I forget if it's Wheel of Time's just a ripoff of Dune or Dune's a ripoff of Wheel of Time, and it's like these books they're so, yes, they have similarities, but they're so different in so many elements as well. It's like
Hmm.
this is what we do. We have things that we gravitate towards and pulls us in, and we make little pieces here and there, and we mesh them into our story. I'm sure there. If my series ever blew up huge one day, there'd be people who would say, "Oh, this is just a ripoff. It's a space ripoff of Wheel of Time," and it's like it's so much more than that. But yes, no, there is certain elements that are
Hmm.
linked to it because it's what I liked. It's what I enjoyed. It's my heart's into putting those elements into the story. So
Well, and there's aspects of it too that, like, there's the hero archetype. And I think a lot of people sometimes go, well, you're ripping off this and this and this. I'm like, well, no, I mean, the hero is the hero. Like, there's really, I mean, you can put the hero in different situations. Maybe you can add different parts of their personality. But at the end of the day, their journey is their journey. I mean, it's hard to change the hero journey. It
yeah,
kind
for
of just
sure.
is. And so it's that balance between the like stereotype and the archetype kind of thing.
Yep. No,
Yeah.
no, for sure. I mean, they've been writing hero stories since the dawn of our time, basically. So it's
Hmm.
you can't really say it's if it's a ripoff. We've all been ripping it off for thousands of years.
Hmm. Yeah, I have. I've been joking a lot recently that I was super destined. There's no way I was doomed to be a nerd because when I was, between the ages of like 8 and 12, we had all the Lord of the Rings movies, we had the Star Wars prequels, we had Harry Potter, the X-Men movies came out, like all of these, Pokemon was created. So
Yeah.
all this stuff came out at my most formative time. And I was
Yeah.
like, I was doomed. There's no way I was
Well,
getting out of that.
I think that's a major chunk of kind of our age group.
Hmm.
It's I think that's why you see so many 30 and 40-year-olds today that are just they're in love with science fiction and fantasy, and I think that's a big part of it. It played a huge part of our childhoods. Basically, it was
Yeah.
kind of really the best content that was out. We didn't have social media back then to see all this different. That was the content we gravitated towards back then. So
Yeah. Yeah. Actually having to, race home from school so I could watch, I think right after school we had like Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, and The Simpsons are all like in a row, and so I would race home to watch all that.
yep.
Yeah. So let's get into maybe we can come back to the book towards the end just to kind of wrap it up so people can you can tell them where to find all that kind of stuff. But
Okay.
so what's your process like a writing? Do you have kind of a now that you've especially now that you've done the second ones out, do you kind of have a path that you follow from like outlining to editing all that, or do you just kind of let it happen? Like what's your process like?
So it's hard to go by my first book because I wrote the outline for it again when I was like 18. I didn't publish it till I was it 36 or 37, 37 I think. So
Mhm.
it was a long, long process of just kind of being a hobby of working on it here and there. The first draft I worked on in intervals for probably 5 or 6 years. That draft, my final product ended up being 175,000 words, but my first draft was like 249,000. So
Mhm.
it was then almost 10 years of just some late nights or early mornings, or if I had free time here and there, kind of doing self editing and stuff like that. And then it wasn't, I had kids and that kind of put everything to the side, and I didn't look at it for probably 5 or 6 years. And it was in 2022, late 2022, that I opened it up and read the manuscript for the first time in forever. And it had been so long since I read it that I actually kind of felt like I was reading someone else's work. And that was the moment where I was like, I need to light the fire and do this and get this thing published. And I went, I was kind of slowing down a little bit in my business end of things. I work construction, and the market's been very wonky the last couple of years with all the volatile stuff going on. So that kind of slowed down. It was half purposeful, half market related. And I just devoted the time to getting, working with an editor, getting beta readers, really hashing out the fine details of getting this thing, learning how to self-publish it. And so long story short, again, it's tough to go by that
Hmm.
process for it. But my second one, then again, things were still slow, and when I released my first book, it really started to bring in a positive reception from seemingly, a good chunk of the people reading it, most of them. And because of that, kind of lit a fire under my butt to just go hard at book two. So I guess if I was to do this more as a full-time writer, that would book two process would be more of how I would go. And I'm definitely a planner. I outline in detail. I probably had 10 pages of outlines every single chapter. And don't get me wrong, as I draft that, things get altered. There's notes I'm adding to it and all
Hmm.
that good stuff. But I start with a pretty solid outline. I know I like to know where the story is going from, point one to the end point. And yeah, my process is draft, and then I kind of have I when I did that whole bunkering down on book one, I made myself a whole kind of note sheet on my phone of the process of drafting. I like to do a couple self edits myself. Then I'll send out the beta readers. Then I might do another couple self edits myself. Then, depending on that, what type of editor I'm going to send to. Like my second one, I kind of felt like I didn't need the developmental editor. I kind of I used it with the first book, and I felt I learned a lot from that process. And I kind of think as a second book, you kind of know where your story is going from there. You kind of know your characters, you know the plot. And I also used a bunch of I had upwards of 8 beta readers, so I felt they're going to let me know if this story is needs help here, there, that, anywhere. And but yeah, then from there, after the developmental phase, it's probably another edit or two, maybe a read through at least, and then you send off to either copy line, proofreaders, both. It's different for everyone. I actually I skipped the copy line, but on the second book again, but I don't seem to be getting problems back with it. But I also had the time for me to really grind through it and kind of
Hmm.
do my own thing with it. So it was
Yeah, it's definitely as you learn things, you kind of can change different parts of the process, and
yeah,
um
for sure.
yeah, for sure. So on that first book, you said you kind of had it, you picked it up, you read it like it was, kind of someone else's work. That probably was that kind of helpful even to kind of like
100%.
you were super kind of distanced from it, so able to
Without a
read it.
doubt.
Yeah. And then
Without a
did
doubt.
you
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead. I was just gonna
No,
ask, so then did it change a lot from when you read it? Did you really restructure it a lot before the final thing, or did it kind of stay mostly the same?
no, there was some restructuring. When I worked, this was after that had occurred. I worked with the developmental editor, and their notes kind of helped me see I needed to add a few scenes into spots. I needed to make certain elements make more sense of the story, and so there was some cutting of scenes. There was adding of other scenes, but there was also the big thing for me was I had a good chunk of my first book that I think was more telling and not showing, and so that was what I learned probably the best from working with that developmental editor, was kind of cutting that out as well as I could from the book. It's my book is it's tough. I span there's 11 different worlds on
Hmm.
in the book that people live upon. So it's got a huge, massive world building. I guess similar. I'm not going to compare it to Wheel of Time, but similar esque in that sense. And so it's just I couldn't fit everything about these into the first book, and there's elements I want to make sense down the road. So there was still some stuff that's kind of telling and not showing, but it's all about finding that balance. I think that's a lot of books you're going to have stuff like that, and I did it purposely in some regards in the first book because I wanted to I wanted to have better impact in the later installments. I want it to make more sense. I think it's gonna kind of open your eye. Like people reading it, they'll kind of be like, "Whoa!" More so as it goes on down the road than just forcing certain things into the first one.
Yeah. Yeah, that the telling versus showing, I I have a bit of a hot take on that of like you can't just cut out all the telling.
No,
Especially
no.
I think with sci-fi and fantasy, I think some people get so caught up with like it's telling and not showing and I'm like, well, sometimes you just kind of have to, especially I think I agree with you like in an earlier book when nobody knows like they're getting figured out with the world and they're orienting themselves. You
Hmm.
definitely have to tell a little bit more cuz it's like otherwise I just don't understand it, you know.
No, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think a perfect example is my book. We haven't gone into the details of like the story, but like a big part of my book is there's an attack on Earth. It is from an alien fleet that is actually human. And we learn that there's these other worlds that humans have lived upon really since the dawn of our time. We have been kept in the dark purposely by them. There's a reason for it. You learn that. But like a perfect example of what we're discussing is in my book, after the attack occurs, there's kind of this power struggle going on out there. And another group comes and says, come join us in this struggle. We'll teach you to fight, all that good stuff. And they kind of explain the situation. And I had a couple people like, oh, I don't know how it's a lot of throwing information out. And it's like, well, my characters are deciding whether or not they're going to leave our planet after just learning that there's other planets and go fight in a war on an alien planet with really what's kind of a alien magic system. I got to
Mhm.
explain a little bit about that before and I thought I handled it well. It's kind of in like a presidential address with delegation of these other forces coming and explaining. But yeah, it's one of those things where it's all personal preference, I think, when you're reading. And some people are going to love it, some people are going to be okay with it, and some people are not going to enjoy it.
Yeah, I think people who are fans of sci-fi fantasy though are a little more forgiving with that too,
Definitely.
where it's like I like world building, so I can just read about world building. Like I don't even have to have a story because I just think it's
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah. Just
So
tell me.
yeah, so like I think it could also come from being Hobbit and Lord of the Rings fans. You know, Tolkien, like the beginning of the Hobbit is like concerning hobbits, and then he just tells you like these are what hobbits are, and this is what they do during their
Yep.
day. And so you're just kind of like, oh, okay, and they got that out of the way. So
Yep.
yeah, that's really cool. So then I'm also a lot more of a I definitely lean on the planning side of things for sure. Um, I kind of when I first started writing, I had never like ever considered doing that, and then I just had an idea and I sat down and just kind of started writing something.
Hmm.
Um, but I definitely hard pivoted to becoming a planner because as the story grew and it's a fantasy and there's all these new elements, I was like, I can't keep track of all this just writing a draft. So, but then I kind of backed off. I kind of went really hard into planning, then I kind of backed off a little now. So I'm probably like a 70-30 planner. But there's always it seems like no matter how much you plan something, because you can kind of treat that outline as a first draft. It
Yeah.
seems like no matter how much you do that, there's always still a moment when you're writing the prose where it's like, oh crap, I have this idea. And then you kind of turn, and then so there's always a little bit of that, I think.
Yeah, no, there definitely is. And don't get me wrong, I'm not sitting here like I don't have 100% of the details mapped out. I like to have my main story arc mapped out. I can't imagine like I don't. Again, this is all personal. I was on the TBR Con panel recently. I think it was in January, and we were discussing like uh, great endings and stuff like that. And some of we were kind of split down the middle between the authors on the panel of whether you plan or whether you don't. I remember one of the authors was like, I have the idea for the story, I just start writing and I just start letting it flow. And I don't bash that in any way. I just can't even wrap my head around how one would do, like, how do you do character development? With like me, I need to have it. I know where this character's going. So that allows me to write the development aspect of the
Hmm.
character from the early goings to the end. But yeah, it's there's things always are going to come along. You're going to write something and you're going to think, even if another great idea doesn't pop into your head, you're going to think, well, I need a better way to get them out of this, or I need a better way to
Hmm.
explain this to the reader, or, yada, yada, that type of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a pretty strong outlines, but I also kind of write a lot and then I get stuck and then I go back and outline and then I get stuck. and then I write more. It's kind of like a back and forth. So I
Yeah.
always have a sense of where I'm going, but I know definitely how things are going to end and how they begin, and I know some moments in the middle.
Hmm.
It's just that connecting it all together sometimes changes quite a bit.
Yeah, well, I think that's normal. That's probably most authors I talk to.
Mhm.
It seems like a lot have that beginning and ending down solid, and then it's kind of getting there in between. I try to map it out as much as I can, just because I feel like like with my first book, there was some I didn't have that one as fully mapped out as my second, and there was some forced kind of trying to get from say point D to point E in the book,
Mhm.
and I felt like some of those scenes ended up being the ones more where I was cutting out later, had to do a good amount of rework on them.
Yeah, I've heard from a lot of the people I've talked to that do a lot of just writing it without an outline, that they end up almost kind of trashing the whole thing because like it becomes you're either write the first draft with an outline or your first draft turns into an outline. Like that's kind of it gets you to
How
the
it
same
goes.
spot basically.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, but I think I don't know because I look at like George Martin is a great example of like he's got this big series. He's just hasn't finished the other one, but he writes like he just kind of writes it and goes with it, and so it's kind of I feel like that it's almost like you can procrastinate a lot easier almost for that. So it's
No,
tough.
no, for sure. And I don't know if this is for everyone, but like me personally, I'm a very kind of I kind of set like deadlines to myself, and if I get ideas, if they're really firmly in my head, I want to try and get them out as quickly as possible. And so especially knowing what's coming when I'm writing towards a certain scene, it's just like it gives me a drive to just write harder because I want to get all that out of my head. And I don't like going and write. I've talked to some authors and they'll write all their critical scenes and then they fill in the blanks in between, and it's just like I just can't imagine doing that because I feel like my passion kind of comes out of me leading towards writing that scene as opposed to having
Hmm.
it already written and needing to find my way there.
Yeah, I've had a couple of moments where it doesn't happen very often, but I have a moment where um, I'll be writing and I get kind of stuck and I'm like, I don't really know how to do this. And then, but I know that there's a scene coming. And so I'll jump and I'll just write the scene that I can see it better in my head, basically.
Hmm.
And then actually, sometimes when I finish that, it unsticks me from before. And I go, oh, okay, now I know how I can get over there. So
Gotcha.
it hasn't happened to me very often. Occasionally it has happened to me.
And yeah, it's all personal preference with this stuff.
Hmm.
I mean, we're all just like there's readers that have a multitude of different subjective preferences and thoughts when they're reading. You could put 100 people reading the same book, you're going to get probably 100 different ideas and review back on that book, so they might have similar themes throughout them, but I think it's the same with writing. It's just
Hmm.
we find what works best for us, what we most enjoy, and we go from there.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe let's go into that a little bit. So you said reception to your books has been pretty good so far,
Yeah, yeah, that
but I'm
was
sure you've maybe had some people who didn't think it was so great.
without a doubt.
So how do you kind of deal with some of that stuff as being a creative and I'm sure there's some person a lot of it when you are creative. It's tough to be like you kind of want to fight for your stuff, but people are going to not like it. That's just part of the deal. So
100%.
how do you kind of deal with some of that stuff?
That was definitely probably one of my biggest adjustments so far. When I was not doing all this as a hobby leading into my debut. I was never part of a writing group. I didn't go to school. I didn't take English, literature, English writing classes, creative writing in college. So like it was all kind of just teaching myself a lot, but also trial and error. And then obviously I worked with the editor and beta readers and stuff like that right before publishing. But it all kind of, the beta reader feedback gave me confidence that okay, people, that was the first time actually kind of strangers read my this story, and they seem to really like it. Now I didn't have connections. So for my first go around, I used mostly paid beta readers. So in my head, I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, well, do they have to like it because they're getting paid? I don't know. I don't know how this process works,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah. So I kind of went in blind, but I took the leap. I published it, and the thing that really worked well for me in the beginning was Instagram is probably my biggest social media platform I market my books on. And I was fortunate enough to just find some really cool bookstagrammers out there that are happy to take in unknown works from indie authors like myself, and they took them in. And in the beginning, I got a lot of great feedback from them. And these are people that are reading every day, that like their whole persona on social media is about reading science fiction or fantasy. And that really helped give me a confidence boost early on. And then another big thing that happened was my strategy when I released my debut was it was out for a week, and then I set it as free for the Kindle version, free for a week and or 5 days if it's one of those. And but at the same time, I stacked promos on a couple of like Free Booksy and Fussy Librarian, stuff like that, those kind of book discount sites. And I ended up getting almost 3,000 downloads to the book. And when I got
Nice.
those downloads, that also led to a fair amount of ratings and reviews that came in, and a few ratings from just natural readers that, I don't know who they are. They read my story, and they really enjoyed it. And again, all that led to a boost that gave me confidence. But then I had moments that brought it crashing down. I remember, I want to say I had like 15 review ratings / reviews on Amazon. It was at a 4.9 or 4.8, something like that. And I got a random 1-star rating. There was no review to it. And that just brought it down to like a 4.2 or something like that. And it was just
Mm-hmm.
like, then you start spiraling. Then you're like, oh no, it's hitting the real market now. Where,
Yeah.
but you don't know what it is. It could also, I mean, they're saying there's trolls out there and stuff. Now I don't know, and I still to this day don't know what that was. But I also reached out and sent it to booktubers, and I've had multiple. I want to say like 4 or 5 who really enjoyed the story and talked about it on their channel. I had another booktuber who did not DNF'd it. So he
Mm-hmm.
was very, kind about it, emailed me and talked to me about it. And he explained he didn't think the writing was bad. It wasn't pulling him in. It wasn't the story for him. And
Mm-hmm.
that was another thing that kind of took a hit. But over time, I think I kind of started to be able to focus on the good as opposed to the bad. I was getting, for every one bad one like that, I was probably getting 4 or 5 good ones. That's not to say there aren't more people who think it's bad, but I think probably a lot of people, if they're not into something, they just walk away from it and don't say anything or don't rate it. So you always have that in the back of your mind of, is it good, or is it but
Yeah.
you got to take the good. There's people who are part of this book community. They have no reason to lie about enjoying it. They've now read my second book. Why would they open up my second if they didn't like the first? That was another big thing that kind of gave me a boost. And yeah, it's still to this day, I still get the imposter syndrome. It's I think I need to be a New York Times best-selling author selling millions of copies for that to
Mm-hmm.
completely go away. Because I can have 10 great reviews in a row, and then I had a recent 2-star that just bashed almost every aspect of my book in the rating, and it
Mm-hmm.
just, that brings you down. But again, you got to just try and focus on the good. This is all books. Happens. Your favorite book out there, it has bad reviews on it, so it's,
Yeah.
you can't let that beat you up.
Yeah, I think, and there's kind of 3 kinds of people. There's people who are going to leave you that great review and they love it, and then there's the people who are definitely just the trolls, and they're just like, I'm gonna trash it because
Yeah,
there's really no reason. And then there's those people in the middle, like you said, where the guy DNF'd it, and it's not that he doesn't like not like it, but he just didn't, wasn't his thing, and that's
yeah,
okay.
yeah, 100%.
YouTube has taught me a lot about, because I've been doing the YouTube thing for like 2.5, 3 years now, and for the most part, like you get good comments, you get good, and then all of a sudden you just get some random comment, and they're just like, you look weird, or like they just say something stupid.
Yeah.
But it does hit, I mean, it hits you. You're like, oh my gosh, like what did you get 100 great ones and you get the one bad one and you just,
Well, I
sticks
think
with
we
you.
as humans, for whatever reason, we focus on the bad over the good sometimes, and I don't
Hmm.
know why, but especially when it's coming to like our creative stuff like this, where we put our heart into and our time into, it's just it's gonna hurt like that. But you know, I always say to people too, I feel like we live, especially nowadays, for whatever reason, I don't know if it's social media or what, we're like there's like this epidemic of narcissism. I feel like we're just everyone thinks they know everything should
Hmm.
be how some people just have this mindset everything should be how they envision it, how they think about it. And I think especially in stuff like, booktube, YouTube, or writing, you're gonna those are the types of people who it's just they gotta say their thoughts, they gotta get it out there.
Hmm.
I think it's almost a lashing out of why do other people like this book. It's one of that one that I got the 2 star, he put in his review that he said he got it off an ad I put where, and I for my ad I just used what a random reviewer said of my book. They said they felt like it was Ender's Game meets Star Wars. I
Hmm.
threw that on my ad, and he went on this tangent of, I don't see this. How is this? Like this whole paragraph
Right.
long spiel about it. And it's just like, I think a lot of that is just lashing out. And probably more so people with insecurities to their own opinions have to kind of
Hmm.
feel like they need to justify themselves. And it's not the case, especially in books and writing. As I said earlier, there's gonna be the best book out there is gonna have 1 star reviews. We're not all gonna like the same stuff.
Yeah. Well, and I can like something and you cannot like it, and that's okay. Like that,
Yeah,
we've kind of lost that ability of like, I don't have to be upset if you don't like it.
exactly,
So even if I
exactly.
do like it, it's whatever. If you don't like it, that's
Yeah.
fine.
I mean,
It,
who in their life do you like everything? I mean, I'm happily married to my best friend wife here. We have such different. She can't stand science fiction. She's
right.
a complete horror lover. I
Hmm.
can't stand horror. I never really read it as a book, but like movies, they just never really the horror movies never really did it to me. It's she could sit and watch a horror movie every single day, all day long. But
Hmm.
that's the point. The point is, we're all gonna have different stuff. It's silly to think otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah, I have. Well, and even, like was saying about Wheel of Time, like I love the story. I love the characters. I love all the stuff about it. I don't like the prose.
Yeah.
I, I it just doesn't work for me. It's not to say it doesn't work
That's a
for other
huge
people.
deal when reading a
Yeah,
book.
right. Yeah, you're bringing up your wife. It's my wife and I are the same too about like she doesn't read novels. Like she'll read nonfiction, but she
Mhm.
doesn't like reading stories. She just
Yeah, my
doesn't.
my wife's very similar to that.
Yeah, she loves it. I love it, but she's
Yeah,
you know I'll talk to her about a book. I'll be like, "This book is so great," and she's like, "Okay, that's great." You
yeah.
know,
And that's
so
it. We're all different. It doesn't mean one thing or the other. I mean, I
yeah.
get blown away sometimes following some of these like Facebook book groups and stuff, and it's like all it is people just arguing over why does someone has to go on there? Why do so many people like this book? It doesn't make sense. And it's like, why does that need to be explained to you? Okay, you
Hmm.
don't like it. That's fine. There's people who obviously do. Like that should be case closed. Who cares after
Yeah,
that?
yeah. I think about that a lot too with the Star Wars prequels because I understand why people don't like them, but I was a kid when they came out, so to me they're like a big deal. Like I love them,
Yeah, it
and
brought you more into the universe than probably the original trilogy did.
yeah. And so, but when you tell people that and they'll be like, "Those are terrible movies." I'm like, I understand why people think they're terrible. I understand,
Yeah,
like, I get the grown up version of why,
yeah,
but the kid in me is still, it's like, I like them, you know?
yeah.
So,
No, 100%. I mean, I said earlier how I love that movie Independence Day. I know that got like critically bombed. I don't know how it does with like younger generations nowadays, but that'll always be one of my favorite movies. It might not be like the smartest plot point or story of a movie, but it's just fun. It was fun to be 10 years old and watching a giant alien spacecraft come and destroy
mhm.
the earth.
Well, and I think, the internet is so interesting because, we have like things like Rotten Tomatoes now, there's Goodreads, there's Amazon, and everything can have a rating and a score. But like, I don't know, when we were kids, I just went into the bookstore and grabbed a book. Like, I didn't read reviews about stuff. I didn't like, there was no anything like that. If I wanted to go see a movie, I just went and saw the movie. And for my, like, I've been so shocked at the amount of times where, like, I'll go look up a movie that I love that I watched when I was younger, and like the rating on it is horrible. And I'm like,
Yeah.
what do you mean? It's a great movie or a
Well,
book
that's
or
why I brought that
something.
movie up, because that's what it is. I think if you go on, it's got like a 40 something on there, and to me, it's
Yeah.
like a classic.
Yeah. It's just it was such a different time than it is now. And so again, it's like, you get the person that leaves the 1-star review, but they didn't say anything. And it's like, yeah, you know, how did one, it doesn't help anyone with feedback, and two, why even leave it?
Yeah, I've gotten 2 1-star ratings on my first novel. No written anything, and I'm just like I appreciate anyone reading my story.
Mhm.
Everyone's obviously leave what you're gonna leave, but I think if you're gonna leave a 1-star or even a 2-star, you should really at least explain it. At least let the author kind of decide whether it's something they can learn from or not. Because so just my main thing I think people don't understand is I hate the rating system personally, but the rating system is very important because, for those of us published on Amazon, your Goodreads rating, your Amazon rating, that is going to decide your push in their algorithm, whether they're
Mhm.
going to show your book to other people or not. So it's
Yeah.
like if you're just hitting a 1-star rating, you're really squashing the chance of an author who spent all this time on this project even
Mhm.
having a chance for other people to see their work. So again, if you think it's 1-star, you think it's 1-star, you should click that rating, but at least I give something back to,
Yeah.
try and make the person, at least give them the option to decide whether they should take it seriously or not, and can make changes to better their writing off of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and all feedback is good to get. I mean, it's good to
Oh
get,
yeah.
even if they just say something dumb like, "I hated your book because, it's blue." Whatever. Just having that feedback though is still good to have, I think.
Like anything, you take it all and you kind of analyze and absorb it, and you work your way around through it all to kind of hopefully better your craft and your process.
Yeah. So do you are you so you said you hadn't really been in when you first started, you hadn't really been in any kind of writing groups and stuff before. Are you in one now? Do you do any of that? Do you have anyone that you like send stuff to helps you? Like,
Yeah, so I actually got invited to this group. You may have seen it floating around on Twitter or Instagram, some social medias. They're called the Break-ins,
mhm,
and there's 16 of us now. It's a 16-person author group of all self-published authors who have either recently um, published or will soon be publishing. Trying to think, there's I think a couple. Well, no, maybe one. Andrew Watson, The Fool's Tale, has a BookTube channel. He's part of it. Trying to think if there's any other. There's Francisca Liliana, but I think she's a bookstagrammer, not a booktuber. But yeah, there's a few of us, and yeah, that's been kind of my outlet now. Of, hey guys, what do you think of this cover? Or hey guys, what do you think? Can you? There's a lot of passing. I haven't had. I kind of joined it, and my second book was kind of deep in the process at that point, so I haven't really had anything to throw out. Can you guys read this? Beta read this for me. But there's been a lot of from the others. Can you beta read this? Or what do you think of this short story? Or does this first chapter grasp you guys? That type of stuff. So I would say that's definitely my group now of writing group.
yeah,
It's an all we consider it an author group, but it's a writing group as well.
yeah, yeah. It's been I have a kind of a local one that I've gone to a few times. It's tough to get kids and family and all that kind of stuff. It can be. I've struggled to figure out getting it in my schedule and being able to really make it to that, because it's you get together and people read their stuff, and I mean it's like a 4 or 5 hour thing.
Yeah.
When you get together, it's like, man, just being able to carve out that chunk of time is rough. But
Yeah, I don't
um
even. That's definitely the tough. Like I wouldn't even. I can't. I don't have the option to do that because I don't have
mhm,
any stretches where I get 4 to 5 hours. So I don't know how. I mean, that's because I have young kids, and
mhm,
me and my wife both work full time. Pretty extensive, demanding jobs. So I don't. I praise people who can find the time to do things like that because it's so tough nowadays.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a few months since I've been able to make it, and I tried to be pretty consistent with it for a minute, and then I was like, I just can't, my daughter is 9, and so she's got events, and then we got things on Saturday. Like, I just
Yeah.
it's like I just can't make it to this kind of
Oh no,
stuff.
I
But
completely understand. I get so jealous of like I'll see on social media other authors and stuff. Oh, I got 8,000 words written this weekend, blah blah blah, and I'm like, the weekend. Believe it or not, the weekend that's my dead time. Like I'm not getting anything done during that time because
mhm,
the kids are home. They're getting the ages now. They got either a birthday every weekend or they got gymnastics or they got this that, and it's just
mhm,
there's just no time to carve that stuff out anymore.
mhm. My wife owns a dance studio, and so we're always, and I work for a church, so we literally, like, our weekends are just always like we actually have more time in the middle of the week, but
I'm
that's not
sure.
when anyone else has time. So
Yeah.
yeah. So how do you that's a great kind of segue into family stuff. How do you kind of now balance some of this with your family? Do you just try to write on the fringes of the schedule? Do you kind of have a set time where you're like, hey, this is my writing time? Like, how do you kind of balance that with your family?
I try. I got lucky in the sense of a writing sense with my second book that my business continued to stay slow, and I've been fortunate that I do new home building as a
Mm,
business, and so I'm a general contractor. I run, manage, oversee the sites. I kind of do it all myself. I find the properties and go from there. I'm a small business owner, but not working for anyone doing it. But that allows me to kind of set my own schedule. And
hmm
I was fortunate enough that when COVID first hit in those years, I live probably a little more than an hour from Manhattan, and things boomed around here. A
hmm
good chunk of New York City moved to my area, so that made business good, and that made a ton of work. I was super busy, and that allowed me to save up a little bit where now things are slower. The market economy is not as good. I was able to last year kind of sit back a little bit and take my time, not just force overpaying for a piece of property, but yeah, that also allowed me to have more time to write.
hmm
Now I'm a little more back into the swing of things, and I'm trying to write a novella into the series. And really, it's just if I can squeeze a couple hours here one day, or again, I have that option because I'm self-employed. But also it's nights, doing my marketing. I'm usually doing them either at night or I'm waking up at 5 in the morning to either do the marketing or write or something like that. It's really just about squeezing that time in because, majority of the working hours I can't do it. And come 4:30, 5 o'clock to 7:38 at night is kiddo time. So
hmm
it's you gotta just it's just really right now I'm still trying to find the right balance, but it's just squeezing things in when I can.
Yeah. I've found that people, YouTube is so interesting because you can see all sorts of people giving advice about things. And one of the things you'll see a lot with writers is they're talking about like having a regular time to write and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, I just get it in when I can. So sometimes I write at 4 in the morning, and sometimes I write at 3 in the afternoon, and sometimes I don't write that day because it just,
Yeah.
depending on what's going on, we're just in that busyness of life right now where
Oh
we're
yeah,
just running, we're running around a lot. So,
for sure. I think anyone who has a normal 9 to 5 job, and especially if you have kids, if you want to do this writing, you're gonna have to be prepared to either be willing to wake up super early or to stay up a little later. Because I think
mhm,
that's really going to be the prime time of I think when you're going to get some stuff done.
yeah, yeah, and I found too, I end up with like little, like this next week I'll have so much time, so I get a ton of writing done in a week, and then I don't write for like 2 because
Yeah,
I just like that week it worked out. The next couple weeks we're running around crazy and we don't have time for it. So
yeah. I
just
just
kind
came
of,
off a stretch where I didn't write for probably 6 weeks to 2 months. I mean, a big part of that was my second book came out about 2 weeks ago, 2 3 weeks ago, and so my push was more so to market that
hmm
than to write. But like, yeah, same thing. Like I remember I tried to write a little bit here and there, and it's just for me, I got to be prepared to have the time to really just kind of put maybe marketing to the side a little bit and devote to writing. So I'm writing that novella now, and in like the past week, I've gotten, I want to say, close to 12,000 words down. So that's
Nice.
it's starting to get into the flow again.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think you can. I mean, I don't know about you. I'm fairly creative most of the time, but sometimes, like, if it's like 10 o'clock, we've had a crazy day. We all got home, and I'm like, well, I could probably write for an hour. I'm just like, I I just can't pull the ideas out of myself,
No, of
and so you're
course.
just kind of staring at it, and I'm like, this isn't really productive at all. And
No, I
yeah.
100%. I mean, especially having young kids, it's can drain you sometimes. The
Hmm.
last thing you want to do is you don't want to, especially you're writing to try and write something good. You don't want to force it. You need to kind of be
Right.
in at least partially in the mood. I mean, it's tough. We're all doing this as a hobby. It makes it, well, not as a hobby, but we're all doing this in our spare time. It makes it tough to you're never. I don't think you're very rarely going to find that time where you're 100% ready to go with it. But it's,
Hmm.
you got to at least be 50% in the door,
Yeah,
I think,
gotta
to
have a
do it.
little bit of brain power left to
Exactly.
to make it
Exactly.
happen. Yeah, that's cool. Well, I'm glad that I'm not the only one because that, you know, sometimes it guess can feel like that. Sometimes with you're a little like trying to figure this out. You're dealing with family, you're dealing with jobs. So but I think everyone kind of goes through that, how to balance it all. So
Yeah, without a doubt.
yeah. Um. So I guess maybe my last kind of thing would be about how did you decide to go the self-published route? Because you could have attempted to go the traditional route. What kind of made you go, "Hey, I think I'd rather just try it this way"?
Well, so about, I want to say it was 2017 or 2018, probably about 7 years before, or 6 years before I actually published the book, I did a hardcore self edit of it. And in my head at that time, I'm glad I did not publish at that time, but in my head at that time, I was like, oh, I think this is ready to go. And I actually, back then, I wasn't even considering self publishing. It's grown so exponentially over the past probably decade, but at that point, I didn't know it had been starting to grow at that stage. And so I kind of just had traditional in my mind. And I did send out queries, and I got, some, I didn't get obviously accepted by anyone, but I felt like I got some decent feedback back from the few that don't just write the generic sentence.
Mhm.
But um, but yeah, and that was kind of when I tabled it. And then when I came back to it recently, I did more research into it, and I had done the research at the start too. And I remember I was turned off at the start, even back then, 7 years ago. Everything I was reading was, even for a science fiction or fantasy book, it should be less than 120,000 words. And I think that was the number I kept seeing everywhere. And in my head, I was like, none of my favorite books are less than 120,000. We're like, they're
Right.
all 300,000 words. And again, mine was sitting, but the final product sits at 175,000 words. So, that just getting back into it with this recent push, that really turned me off from it. And I just remember I was looking into, when, I was deciding in 2022, what I was going to traditionally publish or self-publish. And I did send a few queries back out during then, but just looking into it, it just seemed like everyone was asking for the same stuff. They all wanted the same exact things. They're trying to push the same ideas, and that type of thing's such a turnoff to me. I feel like part of writing is all of us getting our different ideas out there, the diversity of all of us as people, putting our experiences and our heart into these stories. And I just remember being super turned off by that. And I had started to learn how self-published really was taking off. It's still a minuscule chance, but there is a chance of success at it. And on top of that, I also learned not only do you have the slim odds of being selected in traditional publishing, but nowadays that does not guarantee success. I mean,
Mhm.
nowadays it's still slim from there to even make your book to be sold by so much. So in my mind, I'm like, I'm really gonna, even if I'm selected, eh, I'm gonna have to sell millions of copies to probably even make this something that's profitable to me. And again, I mean, I'm self-published. and I can't call it profitable yet.
Hmm.
But I'm doing pretty. I've had kind of a steady growth over the months, and I'm glad I jumped into self publishing because I also have all my own access to what I want to do, and even like getting the second one out quick. I feel like that's helping me as an author. It's making people realize I'm not going to be like a one shot, never see this person again type of writer,
Hmm.
which happens a lot in self publishing. I got the second book out there. People are really enjoying the story. They're getting a real taste for, I think, what I can bring to the table in writing. And I think that helps. If I was in traditional publishing, it would take 2 years minimum to probably get that second one out there. And I don't think that's how things are really working nowadays. Of if you're trying to build yourself from scratch, you're not someone that's already established in the field. You kind of have to, I think, try and get that stuff out there relatively quickly to build a name for yourself. So I kind of
Hmm.
took all this together, and that's when I decided self pub was going to be my route.
Yeah. Well, we live in a world too where, I mean, it's anyone can build an audience now. Like you don't need essentially you don't even really need to self or traditionally publish. And again, like you said, it's such a slim chance anyways that and then you end up, you lose some of your creative control, you lose,
Yep.
and then if it gets even bigger where, they sell it off to be like a movie gets made about it, like you just start losing
All the
all of the
say in
control
things.
of it. J.K. Rowling's a great example of like they're going to make some new TV show and I think she's partially involved, but like they just don't they just kind of they own Harry Potter so they can just
Yeah,
do what they want with it,
they can do exactly.
and she just kind of has to be okay with it or whatever. And Brandon Sanderson, I don't know if you've heard him talk about this much, but that was part of the why he did the secret projects the way he did, is he's getting more and more like he's moving towards being more independent because he's like, I want to be in control of it. And he said even that he's had movie studios knocking on his door constantly, and he goes, well, first off, I don't need their money, which
Yeah.
is nice. That's a nice bargaining chip.
Yeah.
But mostly it's for creative reasons. He's like, I don't want them to butcher what I've created.
Oh yeah.
And we see that a lot now. Like, I don't know if you liked Rings of Power or not, but I felt like it did not live up to what Tolkien, you know, would have created.
I didn't think it was awful. I I thought Wheel of Time was terrible. That
Hmm.
was just such a letdown to me. I did not think Rings of Power was at that level, but it wasn't. It also wasn't something for the extent of how big it was and the money they put into it. Really
Hmm.
should have been a lot better. It's not something that I'm. I think the second. I don't know if the second trailer dropped. They dropped something about the second. I just didn't even care to
Yeah.
look at it. I probably won't be continuing watching again. Like it held my interest when I watched it, but I wasn't blown. It was just okay.
Yeah. We're the same. So with Rings of Power, I was like, this is fine. It's okay. It wasn't amazing. I thought Wheel of Time. I someone asked me about some friend who asked me about like if I thought it was good, and I had just finished. I'd read the first like two books by that point,
Hmm.
um, and so I read the first one, and then I watched the show, and I was like, the first season of the show and the book are not the same, basically at all.
No, no,
They don't
they're
even tell
completely different.
hardly the same story at
Well, and
all.
so much of it didn't even make sense. Like I don't. I haven't watched it in forever. I can't even remember. But just I felt like so much was botched in that show. The
Hmm.
second season, because it's my favorite book series. I was like, well, I'm watching the second season still because
Hmm.
I gotta just give it a a little bit. But the second season was better. I did find myself more drawn into the second season. But then
Hmm.
they just crashed it all down again with the finale. With for whatever reason, it feels like these writers want to make it their own story, and I
Yeah.
just don't understand. Of course, you cannot translate perfectly from page to screen, but there's a reason these are so popular. People
Hmm.
love the main themes and elements going on in these stories. They love the main characters of these stories. These writers just want to change everything about these characters. They want to change everything about these scenes. I mean, how huge is at the end of the second book is it when Rand and Shamael are fighting in the sky over Falm? and they made it. They didn't even make like Rand really fight him in the show. It was more
Hmm.
Egwene fighting him. So it was like, what are you doing? I don't.
Yeah.
I understand they're trying to be like more with the social times and stuff like that, but you're changing the entire story here. You're making the main character of this story not the main character anymore. That is zero recipe for success right there. It's not
Yeah.
going to work.
There's a great interview with Peter Jackson from when they were making the original Lord of the Rings movies. And he says, I don't know if it's in the extras or if he did another interview, but he basically was like, we don't want any of our own stuff in this. We are trying to distill the essence of Tolkien down to make a movie, but it is all him. We are not
Yeah,
trying to, by, you know, the other token, a lot of the stuff you see with like Star Wars, I just saw an interview with some writer, whoever was making the next Star Wars thing, and they were like, we are trying to make our own Star Wars. We're trying to forge ahead with create our own path, and it's like people
why?
don't. Why do no one wants that? They want.
Why? Look at Lord of the Rings. Look at Game of
Mhm,
Thrones. Look at Harry Potter. These stayed pretty spot on to the books. I mean,
mhm,
there's differences, of course, but the main stories are pretty spot on to the books. There's a reason they were so successful. That
mhm.
is the main reason why. It's a pretty easy recipe of give me as close of a translation from this super popular book as you can. It's going to be a hit on screen, as long as obviously CGI and stuff like that is all fine. But story wise, it's going to work if you just stick to it.
The way I described the difference between like why the Lord of the Rings movies versus the Wheel of Time show didn't really work. The Lord of the Rings movies, there's a lot of differences, but
Mm-hmm.
the core like story beats are all there. Like
Yeah,
the story progresses the same. Each, they maybe this character says a line that was a different character in the book, but for the most part, it's like it all kind of happens the same.
100%. And that,
Whereas I felt like the Wheel of Time show was like, did you read the book? I didn't think it
listen,
happened the same at
I
all.
don't mind. I don't mind the minor changes of this and that. Like I don't mind the things that are supposed to happen in Camelin happening in Tarvalon, but then you get to a scene like the finale of Wheel of Time season 1. You have this, this ultimate scene of this series where Rand is kind of facing, he appears in front of the army and kind of faces them down.
Hmm.
And again, they just don't do that, and they make it
Right.
the group of women, which is fine, but it's not the story. That it's
Yeah.
not the main character is Rand. He is the Dragon Reborn. Like if
Right.
you wanted to do this, you should have cast a woman as the Dragon Reborn, and it would
Hmm.
be you'd get uproar, but it'd still be 5 times better than the product we're watching now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, all that to say, going back to, the where this we started with this was like, I think that's why a lot of people for me, I would rather be smaller and less known, but have the control, because I
Yeah,
feel like we're getting to this place where if you do end up selling off even just to a traditional publisher, I don't want to give that up. And I think most people are feeling the same, because we live in a world where they can self-publish and you
yeah.
can build your own audience
You're
and you
seeing
don't.
more and more successful self-published authors,
Mhm,
and on top of it, I think what traditional publishing is never going to die. People have been thinking it's going to die for decades, but it's not going to. But I think what you're going to start seeing more out of traditional publishing is they're now going to let us self-published authors go and do our own marketing, go and build our own audiences, and that's when they're going to probably come. It's either going to become more norm for successful self-published authors to now be the ones querying and accepted,
mhm,
or these publishing houses are going to be coming knocking on the door to successful
yeah,
self-pub authors and saying, this is what we're going to give you for your next book or your next series,
yeah,
and do you want to take it, and I
mhm,
think you're going to have series where it's fully self-published and it's fully in the hands of that person, and then their next series is going to come out and it's going to be a big publishing house behind it.
yeah, for sure. Well, this has been a really great conversation. Really enjoyed talking to you. We're past an hour, so we probably should wrap it up a little bit. But where can we find you? Where can we find the book? All that kind of stuff.
So my main website is bryanwilsonauthor.com. And there's probably two social sites I'm most active on. My main one is Instagram, and my handle is bryan.wilson.author. And then next one's Twitter. I'm not as active on that as Instagram. Don't really have as much of a following there, but I keep on it. I check it, and that one is B Wilson Author is the handle. And besides that, my website has links to my books. This is my first book. It's The Forsaken Planet. It is a sci-fantasy space opera. I like to think it's kind of interwoven with an epic fantasy magic system. And it's a lot of my reviews, as I said earlier, kind of gets woven, kind of intermixed with Ender's Game meets Star Wars. And then my second one just came out a couple weeks ago, The Son of the Prophets. And this is the same thing, fun space adventure, almost kind of Guardians of the Galaxy vibe, but it's more so that one's a little different in many ways. It's a more I would say plot driven, whereas the first is kind of this more character driven battle school trope. This one, the training wheels are off and things kick into a higher gear. And I had one reviewer from SFF Insiders called this Wheel of Time meets Star Wars with a splash of Indiana Jones. And as a Wheel of Time fan, I like to think that sums it up perfectly.
That's cool. Yeah, I'm just looking at the cover. I love the spaceship mixed with the ancient ruins and the jungle. Like it's a really cool contrast. I really like it.
It was
for sure.
It was very important to me to get the spaceship in there because I feel like it just fits my story perfectly. I said how it's all kind of linked. The mythology of it all is linked to the ancient past of Earth, and so I kind of wanted that. Give that ancient, because that's where most people who come out of the first book, that's where they're like, I need to learn more about this, tell me more about this. And so I think the second cover gives a good vibe of people realize, oh, they're gonna get that, and then the book hops right in with kind of a flashback scene to these ancient times. So I think that really hypes people up too when they get into it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, it's been great to talk to you, and thanks everyone for watching. This has been Writing Quest, and we will see you next time.
Thanks for having me.